Hello everyone, welcome to this self-knowledge course. Today, as every Sunday, we have our Phase B lectures, and today we're going to see the lecture number 5 of the 25 lectures of the Phase B. And this topic is actually very interesting. Today we are going to be talking about the balance of the centers and the fabrication of Mercuries. And this is a very, very important issue. Although sometimes we make the mistake of not paying too much attention to it. And balancing the centers is actually fundamental in order to begin like the work or our interior work and that work of the revolution of our consciousness. And when we manage to balance the centers, the process of purification of the sexual energy begins. Then we can manage to awaken the sexual sacred fire, or the fire of the Kundalini, and with it we'll begin the creation of our solar bodies, which would be like impossible if one doesn't balance its centers. So we are in this lecture going to recapitulate what we saw in phase 8 about the balance of the centers, and we are going to see its impact on the transformation of our Mercury, and we will see how the mixtures of these 3 primes of alchemy, which are sulfur, Mercury, and salt, is what will allow us to make superior creations in ourselves. So let's start this interesting topic by talking about what is and how to achieve the balance of the centers. We saw and studied in lecture number 4 of the phase A that we have 7 energy centers in our human machine or physical body that are the ones that allow our different functions. And we saw that 5 of them, thanks to our current egoic condition, are fallen and are constantly used by our psychological defects to manifest through our human machine with the intention of feeding on our energy and thereby grow and be able to submit us more to satisfy them. And because of these centers are completely unbalanced, or better said, is because of that these centers are completely unbalanced. All day long, we waste the energy of our intellectual center in all kinds of thoughts. And the same with the energy of the emotional center. We waste it by feeling all kinds of negative emotions. Likewise, we use the energy of our motor center, talking all kinds of superfluous things and doing all kinds of deeds that just go in favor of the satisfaction of our ego. So throughout the day, we waste the energy of our centers, and to make matters worse, when we go to sex, we reach orgasm and ejaculation, exhausting with that the energy that remains in the sexual center, and so on. For pleasure, we deplete all our energy or all our energy resources day after day. Then we must understand that we have to put order in our interior so that each center can work with its own hydrogen. The hydrogen is actually the energy. And when we go to sleep each night, the instinctive center is responsible for receiving the quota of daily energy and of distributing this energy to the lower centers. And that is actually why we astrally unfold every night, so that the soul leaves the body with its unstoppable train of thoughts and emotions, and the vital body, which has its seat in the instinctive center, can replenish energy to the lower centers. It actually delivers 7 million units of energy to the motor, to the lower intellectual, and to the lower emotional centers. 7 million units respectively. and deposits 100 million units of energy in the sexual center, since it has the most important function, which is to create. But it happens that with the terrible waste that we have of energy all during the day, the energy that is given to each center to fulfill its basic functions, for example, our intellectual centers, its function is to think, and our lower emotional center, its function is to feel. Our motor center has the function of talking and acting. And as we deplete, as we constantly waste that energy, we quickly deplete all the energies of those centers, and from the sexual center to work, then it needs to like steal energy from the other centers, because when they exhaust their energy, they go and they steal energy from the sexual center to continue like working. And when we have to put in action, let's say, our sexual center in order to create, in order to work, this center steals energy from the other centers, thus charging itself with heavier hydrogens than the one it needs to make superior creations. Then the sexual imbalance in that of the entire human machine, of course. And it is very important to keep this in mind, because the balance of the centers is basic for the work. So for each center to work with its own hydrogen, we must begin the psychological work that is known as the death in march or death in progress, which is practicing the psychological death from moment to moment, and that will be very helpful. And because of this, by using the psychological death, we will be helping the sexual center to work with its own hydrogen. Because while the sexual center is working with heavier hydrogens, it cannot produce the energy that is needed to fabricate the solar bodies. So, how is the balance of the centers achieved? Well, as I was saying, by working the psychological death from moment to moment. So we get to achieve righteousness through the practice of the four rights: the right thinking, the right feeling, the right action, and the right talking. This is a very simple work, but it requires a lot of practice and continuity of purpose. And it just consists of incessantly self-observing ourselves, that is constantly directing that third eye, that is the sense of the self-observation, to our interior to discover the psychological defects that are wanting to manifest in the human machine. So, right thinking is actually the silence of the mind, keeping our mind silent. If suddenly the mind starts to speak, we must judge it. We must judge if it is a psychological defect that is manifesting itself to feed on our mental energy. And when we discover that the one who is speaking now in my mind is, for example, a self of pride, or of self-sympathy, or of criticism, or self of fear, or resentment, or greed, or lust, etc. It is as simple as looking at what this defect is looking for. What is this thought directing me to? And there I'm going to discover what is the defect that is actually or currently acting in my intellectual center. And when we discover it, when we get to identify that it is a psychological defect, it's not a part of our consciousness, we ask our particular Divine Mother to eliminate that defect, and we then return to the state of self-observation and inner silence. We must be the whole day in inner silence, having this mind under control, that we get to use the mind whenever we need it, not letting the mind to use us whenever our psychological defects wants to use our intellectual center. And in this way, we are going to be rescuing first this part of consciousness trapped in that detail of the self that was manifested in that thought, and we are going to be saving the energy that this defect came to take. So we know that during the day we have thousands of thoughts, and if we are alert, if we are in self-observation, we will be able to eliminate each one of those details of the ego. And if doing that the whole day, we are going to be recovering a lot of consciousness. And well, the same to achieve the right feeling. It is observing the emotion from moment to moment, judge each emotion. If it is anxiety, if what I'm feeling is sadness, if what I am feeling is fear or concern or guilt or hatred or loss, etc. Every emotion will pass through the filter of righteousness. If it doesn't come from our being, from our consciousness, but of a psychological defect, it must die. So we are going to be asking our Divine Mother mentally to eliminate each of those emotions that we get to identify working on ourselves, or better said, we are going to be eliminating every psychological defect that is acting in our emotion. And in the same way, we are going to judge what we say and what we do. And with the practice of the psychological death, we will be achieving the right action and the right talking. And this is going to allow us to start saving energy for the work to achieve chastity and to get to light the sacred fire of the Kundalini. And with this work, we will start purifying our Mercury, which is a basic component so that the spiritual alchemy can be achieved within us. Mercury is our creative sexual energy, which, due to that imbalance that we have in our centers and the number of cells that are taking that energy, contaminating it, it is in a black state, like you see here, like the first image. It is in that putrefaction, that is in Latin, and that is the current state in which we the state that all the ones who start this work have its Mercury. And because when we all begin this work, we all begin with the black Mercury, and we must do this work of balancing the centers to carry out the transformations in the Mercury. As the creative sexual energy is purified, it goes changing its colors. And this work of purifying Mercury is very important. It's basic if you want to enter esotericism, if you want to achieve the spiritual sexual alchemy. And well, as I was telling you, we all start with black Mercury. This is like the raw Mercury when it is unworked. And it is quite common for people to dream of dirty water. We know that in the astral, the water represents our sexual energy. And the color the water has in the astral plane represents our sexual energy. And if we see the waters of the river, or the sea, or of a pool in the astral plane, or even of a glass of water, and we see it is contaminated, then you are seeing what is the current state of your sexual energy. The normal thing is that when we have not yet started to work to balance the centers, our internal waters are dirty, smelly, due to the constant looting of energy that the psychological selves are doing throughout the day. However, when we begin to do the work of self-observation and psychological death from moment to moment, seeking rectitude in thinking, feeling, acting, and talking, we will experience astrally the transformation of our waters. Our Mercury will turn white. Then we will see ourselves in the astral, for example, bathing in crystal clear waters. But we must understand that this is just the beginning of the purification work, that therefore we must rise each time to like a higher octave in that psychological work to continue raising the level of purification, since there is still a lot of egoic manifestation. And if we lose the continuity of purposes that we have in this work, if we like stop self-observing ourselves and stop asking for death for all those defects, by law of the pendulum, we will return to black Mercury, especially if we continue to spill our sexual energy at will. And well, the next level of purification is to take that Mercury to the yellow color. And to achieve this, you have like to start like sharpen your self-observation sense every time a little more, and start seeing and eliminating details. For example, I am, let's say, self-observing myself when my partner made I don't know, comments that I didn't like, said something that hurts me, for example. And if I'm beginning this work, in that situation, I could manage to see maybe an emotion of displeasure. And I ask for death to that self of displeasure in my emotion before that scene. And with that, I'm actually saving some energy, and I'm actually rescuing some sparks of my consciousness. However, to raise the level of purification of Mercury, we must become very detailed in observing the manifestations of the ego. So, before the same situation with the couple, I sharpen my self-observation, and I discover that this emotion of displeasure that I feel, dislike, actually came from a wounded pride, from self-consideration. And if I get to see that, I also ask for death for those details. I also observed that in my mind, I was already thinking what to answer, how to hurt him back. So actually, I get to see some details of revenge. And I also discover that I'm having certain tensions at the same time, that all in my body. For example, in my shoulders, like for example, in my head. And I'm going to be asking for death to all of this, and thus I am raising the level of purification of my energy, because with each request for death, we are rescuing more essences, which are the sparks of sulfur that are going to fertilize at Mercury, and at the same time, we are rescuing more energy. So we are like purifying our sexual energy. And in order to light this sacred fire, we must manage to ensure that the sexual center conserves its 108 million units of energy. And this Mercury purification, as I told you, must be verified in the astral plane. And on the physical plane, it will be manifested in the fact that you are going to be having more and more control on or over your sexual apparatus during the suprasex practice, since the energy will no longer go into practice so heavy, so contaminated, and therefore it will be like easier to transmute that energy, because now it is like lighter. And we must understand that even in the yellow Mercury, the work is still deficient. Yellow Mercury indicates that the centers are already balancing. Even so, it is necessary to intensify much more the work, the psychological work, to get to reach the red Mercury. Color red in our internal waters indicates that the Kundalini has awakened. the sacred fire, with which we're going to make the creation of our solar bodies. When we turn our Mercury to red, it is because we are already achieving a level of balance of the centers that is allowing us, like that the intellectual, emotional, and motor centers are not spending more than the 7 million units of energy that correspond to each one. And so the sexual center is maintaining its 100 million units of energy to use them in the suprasex. The person at that level have a great sexual control, have eliminated the fornicating self, and for this is no longer having sexual faults. At this level, it is said that the person has reached hydrogen 12, which is the level of purification necessary to awaken the sacred fire of Kundalini at the base of the spinal column. And when the sacred fire is lit and the person goes to the sexual practice and transmutes its sexual energy, that transmuted energy is now known as the hydrogen C12, which is what will crystallize the existential bodies of the being. Thus, we see the importance of the balance of the lower centers to be able to elaborate in us, in our laboratory, that energy, that is hydrogen 12, which is that of sex, that once sexually transmuted, this hydrogen 12 becomes hydrogen C12, which is the sacred fire. That is already the already transmuted sexual energy. And a person who gets serious, who have continuity of purposes in this work, can actually get to light the sacred fire in a time that can range from 7 months to 1 year, approximately. But it is important to know that to light the sacred fire, the person must be practicing sexual alchemy with a stable partner of the opposite sex in fidelity, chastity, and love. But it's interesting, actually very interesting, to understand the wonderful alchemical process that occurs there in a practice of sexual magic. Esoterically, the 3 primes of alchemy has always been spoken of. For example, Master Paracelsus spoke about these 3 principles, and we know that the goal of alchemy was to search for the philosopher's stone. And these 3 alchemical principles, known in Latin as the tria prima, are made up of sulfur, mercury, and salt. And the interesting thing is to come to understand and to verify that this alchemy is carried out in ourselves, in the alchemical lab that is in our sexual gonads. There, the mercury, that is the already pure sexual energy at a level of hydrogen 12, is going to be fertilized by the sulfur, which are the essences that we liberate with the psychological death. And the salt, which is given to us by the works that we do for the good of others, when we help the other brothers of humanity, we in return receive dharma, or the merits of the heart, which is internally represented with salt. When you help others, it's very common that you see yourself receiving salt as a payment in the astral plane. And this salt, or these merits of the heart, will serve like as a coagulant or thickener of this alchemical mixture, so that those existential bodies of the being begin to crystallize. And the mixture of these 3 components results in the philosopher's stone, which is actually the sacred fire, which has the power to transmute the brass of the personality into the gold of the spirit. which at a higher level, I mean, when we finish the work of the first mountain, will become the intimate Christ, who is already like the fire of the fire, the completely developed philosopher's stone that will come to transform these solar bodies that we create in the first mountain into bodies of gold that are going to be created in the second mountain of this esoteric work. So, to achieve this alchemical mix, we must have a balance in the work of the three factors for the consciousness revolution. Since with the psychological death is from where we obtain the sulfur, and with the sacrifice for humanity is from where we obtain the salt, and with the spiritual birth is where we get to activate our Mercury and make this alchemical mixture that will allow us to create ourselves internally. First, we are going to regenerate our physical body. Then we are going to regenerate our vital body. Then we are going to start to create our solar astral body, then our mental astral body, and our causal body, of which we barely have an embryo of these bodies right now. And we are going, by doing this, to have a conscious presence in the different dimensions of nature. So here you can see like the resume of the work that we must do to balance the centers and to fabricate our Mercuries. But now to finish, I want to talk to you a little about this very important point. And it is that in the state in which we currently find ourselves, we are simple bodies at the service of nature. We serve as energy food for nature and for millions of negative external and internal entities that like parasitize, and they feed on our energy. So it is not convenient for the mechanics of this nature that we wake up, that we start saving our energy, and that we start having a control of our inner nature, because this would imply that we are going to have control over the external nature. And to prevent this, nature is constantly giving us many toys, many forms of entertainment. Like when you buy toys for a child to keep him happy and distracted, exactly the same. And we, as idiots, entertain ourselves with all those toys and forget to work on ourselves. Toys like money, like work, like worries, like all kind of distractions, like the incessant search for fame, for luxuries, for entertainment. I mean, even the social problems are parts of these toys. And all this with the purpose of identifying ourselves with all that, and that we get to forget that we have available energy within us, and that we have a very important work to do in ourselves, which is actually the only true objective of our existence. And the invitation of this lecture and of this self-knowledge course is that we reflect on all these aspects and encourage us to do this work of balancing our centers and to verify all these processes internally, since verification is what gives us the strength and the security on the work that we are doing. And well, this has been today's topic, which is the topic number 5 of the Phase B. And I will invite you next Sunday to the topic number 6 of the Phase B. That will be a very interesting topic. In this one, we will be talking about the 7 churches and the 7 chakras. And we are going to see all the faculties and the wisdom that we are going to acquire when the churches and the chakras awaken. So don't miss this interesting lecture. And this has been all for today. Thank you very much to all of you, and see you next Sunday. Ciao, ciao.